The wind howled like a caged animal outside the tiny farmhouse sitting alone at the edge of Dust Valley. Rain pounded against the rusted roof and slithered into every crack it could find. Inside, Widow Mara Dawson sat near the flickering fireplace, her needle trembling in her hand as she patched up an old quilt that had already seen too many winters. Grief had lived in this house longer than she had. Ever since her husband, a cattleman known across the frontier, was buried beneath the oak hill, silence had been her only companion. The townsfolk kept their distance, respecting her loneliness or maybe avoiding it. But she endured each day, warming herself with the memory of kindness she once shared and still refused to let die. Just as she set her sewing aside, a desperate knocking shook the door so violently it startled her to her feet. Mara hesitated a moment. Visitors rarely came during storms, and never at night. With cautious steps, she cracked the door open and found a soaked, shivering boy standing there, clutching the fragile hand of a frail old woman. The boy's hair was plastered to his forehead, fear gleaming in his wide brown eyes. The old woman's silver hair hung heavy with rain, her breath shallow as she leaned on the boy for support. "Please," the boy stammered, voice trembling, "the bridge washed out, and Grandma, she can't walk any farther." Mara's heart clenched at the sight. She didn't know their names, their pasts, or their intentions, but she knew what helplessness looked like. Without another thought, she swung the door wide open. "Come in out of that rain. You're safe now." Warmth prickled the boy's cheeks as he guided his grandmother inside. Mara helped the old woman settle near the fire, rubbing her cold hands gently. "You're kind," the grandmother whispered. "We didn't know where else to go." Mara smiled faintly, something she hadn't done in a long while. "A storm doesn't care who we are," she said. "It tests whether we still remember how to care." The boy introduced himself as Evan, and his grandmother as Abigail. Mara noticed the fine stitching on their soaked clothing, elegant fabric she had only ever seen worn by the wealthy elite who lived far across the territory. What were they doing wandering the outskirts like common travelers? But she didn't pry. She fed them soup, warmed blankets around their shoulders, and offered them her own bed. "I'll sleep by the fire," she insisted. "Guests deserve comfort." As the rain continued its assault on the roof, Evan gazed around the humble home. The worn furniture, the cracks patched with love, the photographs of a smiling cowboy holding Mara's waist tight. He could sense the loneliness in the walls. "You live here all alone?" he asked softly. "Yes," Mara replied, her voice carrying both strength and sorrow. "But tonight, I don't feel alone." What none of them knew was that Evan and Abigail were no ordinary travelers. The two belonged to the Richmond dynasty, the wealthiest family across the entire Western Territory, owners of mines, railroads, and half the cattle driven through the region. Their disappearance that evening had already thrown businessmen and lawmakers into a frenzy. But here, in the warmth of Mara's home, riches had no meaning. Kindness did. Abigail watched Mara carefully, the way she tended to strangers without hesitation. "You remind me of someone," the grandmother murmured under her breath, narrowing her eyes in soft recognition. But she said nothing more. As the storm raged on, Evan drifted to sleep with a comfort he hadn't felt even in mansions of polished marble. Mara sat awake, staring into the fire, unaware that her simple act of compassion would soon change her life in ways she could never imagine. Before she finally rested her eyes, she whispered quietly to herself, a habit she'd kept since her husband's passing. "If anyone out there is listening, thank you for bringing company tonight." Morning sunlight washed over the valley, turning the storm's wreckage into glittering dew on every surface. Mara brewed coffee, the smell filling the small kitchen. Evan woke first, stretching as though he hadn't slept so well in years. Abigail followed, leaning on her cane but looking healthier already. Mara smiled at the sight. She rarely had someone to cook for, and the simple joy of preparing warm food revived a part of her she thought had died with her husband. "You've done too much for us," Abigail said gently while accepting the cup. Her eyes lingered on Mara with a mix of gratitude and curiosity, like she was studying a puzzle whose answer mattered greatly. Mara waved off the concern. "It's nothing. If my Henry were here, he'd say a stranger in need is a neighbor in disguise." The boy's gaze wandered again across the living room. Photos told a life story. Mara and Henry in front of a newly built barn, a younger Mara riding a horse with wild confidence, local fairs where Henry's name was proudly stitched on ribbons. Evan traced the frames with his eyes, whispering, "You must really miss him." Mara paused, the way grief always demands silence first. Then she nodded. Every sunrise, every sunset. But loneliness teaches you something. The heart doesn't break because it's empty. It breaks because it remembers. Before Evan could respond, hooves thundered outside. Abigail stiffened instantly, recognizing the distinct rhythm, the disciplined hammering of elite horses, trained and expensive. Mara peeked through the window. A group of 10 armored riders surrounded the cottage. Their uniforms gleamed with a familiar emblem, the silver antler, crest of the Richmond dynasty. Mara's pulse kicked. Are you in some kind of trouble? Evan swallowed hard. They're our guards. They must have tracked us. The door swung open forcefully before she could ask another question. A stern man entered first, tall, sharply dressed, authority clinging to him like a second skin. When he spotted Evan, he rushed forward, kneeling down and gripping the boy's shoulders. Master Evan, you had us searching through hell and back. And you, Lady Abigail, why wander off without warning? Abigail's response wasn't scolding. Instead, she raised her chin and stated, I wanted to see the territory without walls and servants. And thanks to this woman, we were not lost, we were found. The stern man turned to Mara. Madam, do you know who you've sheltered? They are the richest people in the territory, Mara finished quietly, realization dawning like a slow sunrise. Her heart stumbled, she'd fed royalty her leftover stew. But Evan stepped between his guard and Mara. She wasn't afraid of us, or what we owned. She helped because she cared. That's worth more than gold. Abigail approached Mara, taking her hands. My dear, hospitality like yours is rare. People bow when they see our wealth, yet you opened your door for our weakness. I cannot let that go unrewarded. Mara shook her head quickly. I didn't do it for reward. I know, Abigail replied, voice like warm silk. That's why you deserve one. Wordlessly, the guards escorted them outside. A carriage made of polished ebony waited, symbols of power etched into its doors. Abigail turned once more to Mara. We will come back. And when we do, I will ask just one favor, allow us to return your kindness. The riders thundered away, leaving silence behind, except now the silence felt different. Not empty. Expectant. Days passed. Mara tried returning to routine, but life had shifted. Her door suddenly bore deliveries from unknown senders, fresh supplies, rare spices, new boots, medicine, even a beautifully carved chair that must have cost more than her entire home. She suspected the Richmonds were secretly supporting her, but they never signed their gifts. Then, one chilly evening, the sound of hooves returned, not a battalion this time, just a single horse. Evan slid off it, dusted himself, and marched up to the porch with determination bigger than his boots. Grandma wants to buy you a new house, he blurted. She says no argument. But, I told her you'd want something better. Mara laughed, confused. What could be better than a new house? A family, Evan said simply. She froze, his words landing exactly where her heart had been aching the loudest. Evan continued shyly, Grandma thinks you'd make a good tutor for me. We want you to come live with us, at the Richmond estate. Mara stepped back, overwhelmed. The Richmond estate. That place was practically a kingdom. She was just a widow with patched quilts and cracked windows. I can't leave everything here, she whispered. You'd bring what matters, the boy said. Your kindness. For a moment, Mara imagined it, a home full of voices and laughter, a reason to wake up and not dread the silence. Maybe life wasn't done with her yet. She placed her hand on Evan's cheek. Let me think about it. His smile was the answer, warm and hopeful. Take your time, he said. We'll keep coming back, I promise. And he did. Every visit felt more like a new beginning. The Richmonds weren't just offering her a life upgrade, they were offering her a place where her heart could live again. Little did she know, a shocking revelation still waited. Something connecting her late husband and the Richmond family, something that would rewrite everything she understood about destiny.